I was not supposed to be here. Not in this terminal, not carrying this suitcase, and certainly not moving with the kind of purpose people only expected from younger men. But when they turned their backs and left me with those 7 words, I decided I wasn't going to just fade away. They told me, "You'll slow us down." They didn't even say it with cruelty, just the tired impatience of those in a hurry. My own family, my blood. The irony, of course, was that they hadn't realized I'd been waiting my whole life to speed up. I was 77. My name is Arthur Levins. Widower. Father of 2. Grandfather of 4. Former maintenance engineer. Survivor of a war nobody even studies anymore. They said I was too old to come along on their trip to Europe. Too many stairs. You'll need help with your meds. You'll be tired after security. But they were wrong. So I bought a separate ticket. Didn't tell a soul. And now I stood beneath the glow of the flight board at gate C-18, my fingers curled around the handle of my carry-on like a man gripping his second chance. Let me tell you something: when people think of old age, they think of slowness, decay, forgetfulness. They don't realize that inside this wrinkled skin are decades of stories and secrets. They forget that we've loved harder, lost more, and fought longer than most of them have even lived. But I remember everything. And that's exactly why I had to go. The flight to Vienna wasn't leaving for another hour. I'd picked the seat by the window, of course, always the window. I didn't need the view. I needed the reminder that I was still moving, still traveling, still alive. I looked around at the crowd, mostly younger folks, earbuds in, eyes locked on phones, everyone half here and half somewhere else. That used to be me, once. Always moving, always chasing something. But today, I wasn't chasing anything. I was returning. The last time I was in Austria was 1962. I was 24, and I hadn't yet met Helen. I was just a kid with a backpack and a broken heart after the army. I'd stood in the middle of Stephansplatz in Vienna, watching snow fall between the spires and wondering whether anything in the world could feel as cold as silence. It was there I'd met Jacob. He was a local mechanic, about my age, and we bonded over nothing more than busted shoelaces and broken German. He gave me a bed, then a meal, and over a few short weeks, a kind of friendship you only form when you've both survived something. I never told him what I'd done in the war. He never told me what he'd lost. We didn't need to. Men like us just know. When I left Vienna, I left a letter behind with a promise. If I ever come back, it'll be to thank you. 63 years later, I still owed him that. Sir? Boarding for Flight 46 to Vienna. The voice pulled me from memory like a rope. I stood slowly, every joint a stubborn conversation, and walked toward the gate. The attendant smiled, not condescending, just kindly, as she took my boarding pass. Heading home, she asked. I paused, then nodded. Yes, I said. Something like that. The flight was smooth. I didn't sleep. Too many memories in the dark. Instead, I thought of Helen, the way she used to rest her head against the window like she was trying to listen to the stars. I thought of the years we'd spent building a life, quietly, earnestly. I thought of how everything had changed after she passed in '08. How my kids had slowly stopped asking for advice, only calling when something broke. I didn't blame them. Life moves fast. That's why this trip mattered. Not just for me. For them, too. Vienna greeted me with overcast skies and the hum of trams. I stepped into the city like a man stepping into a forgotten chapter, letting the sounds and smells drag old memories out of dusty corners. My first stop was the address I'd written on a napkin 60 years ago. Jacob's garage. Or at least what used to be his garage. It was gone now, replaced by a sleek apartment building with tinted glass and no soul. I stared at it for a long time. The same sidewalk where we used to drink cheap beer after hours. The same street lamp that once buzzed and flickered like it knew our secrets. But no Jacob. I turned to leave when an old woman with a cane called out to me in German. Are you looking for Jacob Adler? The name hit me like thunder. I turned, too fast, and almost lost my balance. Yes, I said, breath catching. Do you know him? She nodded. He passed. Years ago. But his son still runs a shop nearby. Bookstore. On Wiedner Hauptstrasse. A bookstore. Jacob's son. A door was opening. The bell above the bookstore door chimed like something out of a dream. Rows of shelves, all wood and whispering paper. It smelled like dust and memories. A man behind the counter looked up. He was about 50, balding, wearing glasses. Help you find something? I stepped forward, my voice steadier than I felt. I'm looking for Jacob Adler's family. He blinked, then removed his glasses. I'm his son, Peter. I smiled. Your father saved me once. A long time ago. What followed was a conversation that stretched for hours. I told Peter about the snow, the shoelace, the soup that tasted like heaven. He told me about Jacob's passing peaceful, surrounded by family, and about the stories his father told, including one about a young American soldier with haunted eyes who left a note and disappeared. That was you, Peter said. Yes, I said. That was me. He asked why I came back. I could have told him a dozen reasons. Regret, memory, guilt, gratitude. But the truth was simpler than that. I owed him a thank you. Peter asked me to stay for dinner. I did. His children asked questions about America. His wife made a stew that nearly brought me to tears. For the first time in years, I felt like I belonged in a room again. When I left, Peter pressed a letter into my hand. The envelope had yellowed, the ink fading. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a single sentence, written in Jacob's firm script. We save each other, Arthur. You just don't know it yet. I stood on the cold street, wind biting through my coat, and let the tears come. The next morning, I woke in a modest hotel near Karlsplatz, the kind with keys instead of cards, and wallpaper that whispered stories to the ceiling. I hadn't slept that well in years. Maybe it was the air, or maybe it was something else, like a part of me had finally been heard, and now it could rest. I folded Jacob's letter again and slipped it back into my wallet. It belonged close. But this journey wasn't over. Not yet. There was still one more stop I had to make. I boarded the morning train to Budapest, where I hadn't been since 1949, not officially, at least. It was a part of my history I never told anyone, not even Helen. Some stories are just too heavy to pass on. But I carried them anyway. Inside my bones. Inside my silence. The ride was just under 3 hours, though it felt longer. Not because of the miles, but because of what was waiting for me at the end of them. Her name was Alona. I met her when I was 19. The war had barely ended. The world was rebuilding with bricks still soaked in smoke. I was part of a classified intelligence mission that crossed through Hungary briefly, long before diplomacy had returned, before borders were trustworthy again. We weren't supposed to speak to locals, but she worked at the inn where our team was housed under false identities. She brought us food, changed our linens, and moved like a ghost, silent, cautious, always watching. One night, she knocked on my door with a tray of soup and a note folded beneath the napkin. You're not who you say you are, it read. I nearly panicked, but when I looked up, she was smiling. Don't worry, she whispered. Neither am I. She was brilliant, brave, and living a double life, feeding intel to foreign journalists from under the noses of the secret police. Over 3 weeks, we became everything to each other. When I left, she kissed me once, placed a locket in my hand, and said, if you survive this life, come back and find me. But I never did. And it was that regret, that unkept promise, that had gnawed at me all these years. The train screeched into Kelly station with the kind of slow groan only old steel makes. I stepped off, feeling strangely light, like time was peeling away from my shoulders. Budapest was both familiar and foreign. The Danube still shimmered. The parliament still stood like a cathedral made of politics and ghosts. But the city had changed. Cleaner, busier, louder, yet beneath it all the same pulse. I checked into a small inn near Buda Castle and unpacked my bag. Just one photo came out. A black and white portrait of Alona from 1949, folded so many times it had a crease right through her eyes. She was smiling in it, that rare, almost defiant smile. Could she still be here? Could she still be alive? I began with the only name I had, Torok. It was her surname, common in Hungary, unfortunately, but it was a start. The clerk at the inn pointed me to a small municipal archive tucked near the river. A dusty office where time seemed to have paused around 1994. The receptionist was young, maybe 30, and looked surprised when I explained my search. You're looking for someone from 1949? Yes, Alona Torok. She worked in hospitality, a guest house near Andrusy UT. She frowned and typed slowly. There are records, but nothing digital that far back. We'll have to check microfilm. So we did. For hours. Until, finally, a listing. Alona Torok, born December 7th, 1927, employed at Pava Street Inn, Budapest, 1948-1950. My breath caught. She was real. still tethered to this city by ink and paper. Then came the question I had been dreading. Is she still alive? The woman hesitated, then searched again. After 5 more minutes, she looked up. She passed away 5 years ago. But my heart dropped. She had no spouse listed. But she had a daughter, born in 1950. Name, Zhuzha Torak. A daughter, born the same year I left. My knees nearly buckled. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake listening to the creaks in the floorboards and the beating of a revelation I wasn't prepared for. She'd had a child. She never told me. Or maybe she didn't know herself when I left. Either way, the possibility I'd pushed away for decades was suddenly sitting across the room like a stranger with my eyes. Could she be mine? Could I have a daughter I never knew? And what if she hated me? The next morning, I followed the trail. I found a florist shop near the Jewish quarter registered under the name Zhuzha Torak. It was small, sunlit, and full of violets. The woman behind the counter was in her early 70s, with silver-streaked black hair tied back loosely. She looked up from arranging a bouquet and offered a polite smile. Joe Napot, how can I help? I hesitated. My Hungarian is poor. She switched to English, perfectly. Then we'll make it easy. Are you looking for something in particular? I stepped forward, heart thundering in my ribs. I'm looking for Ilona Torak's daughter. Her hand stilled. Who's asking? My name is Arthur Levins. I knew your mother. A long time ago. She stared, eyes wide, then narrowing. The air between us thickened. You're the American? I nodded. She spoke of me? She laughed once sharp, not cruel. Only 1,000 times. We sat in the back room, a kettle between us. She poured me tea without asking. Her hands trembled slightly. She told me she met a man during the war, that he left suddenly. She said if he ever came back, I should hear him out before deciding whether to forgive him. I sipped, throat dry. I didn't know about you. I believe that, she said. She wasn't sure either. Not for a while, but she always wondered. I reached into my wallet and slid the photo of Ilona across the table. She saved me, I said, in more ways than one. She picked up the photo and stared. I always thought she was lonely, even when she wasn't alone. She never married, never even dated, really. I swallowed hard. She waited. Yes, Zhuzha said quietly. She did. She brought out a box later that afternoon. Inside were her mother's belongings. Old passports, a necklace, letters she'd never sent. One of them was addressed to me. I read it slowly, hands trembling. Arthur, if you're reading this, then time has given us another chance, however small. I never blamed you. Not once. You did what men like you must do. But I want you to know, I loved you. And if Zhuzha is yours, I hope you will find a way to know her. She has your quiet strength. And your stubborn heart. Come back to me. Or at least come back to who we were. Ilona. I don't remember crying. Only the silence after. Zhuzha touched my hand once, lightly. She left that in the box for decades, she whispered. Like she was waiting. We spent the next few days walking the city together. She showed me where her mother used to take her to feed ducks. The apartment they shared. The library Ilona loved. Slowly, a picture formed not of a woman I had known briefly, but of the life she had built from the shards of war and memory. Zhuzha asked about me. About America. About Helen. About what I believed in. We laughed more than I expected. We cried once, just once, on the bridge overlooking the Danube, where she said, "Do you think she saw us right now?" I looked at the sky, then at the river. She sees everything. On the final day, as we stood outside the florist shop again, I handed her something, the old locket Ilona had given me in '49. I've kept this, I said, all these years. But it belongs to you now. She opened it. Inside were 2 tiny photographs, curled at the edges. One of Ilona, the other barely faded, of me at 19. She closed it gently and said, "I'm glad you didn't let them leave you behind." And I realized she meant more than just my family. When I flew back to the States, the airport felt different. Not because it was home, but because I was someone else now. Not just a father or a grandfather, but a man who had finally finished something. Who had kept a promise, even one made decades too late. The plane touched down in New Jersey just after sunset. I sat in the back of the cab, watching the skyline pass like a dream I'd already had. The driver didn't talk, and I was grateful for the silence. After all that had happened, after Vienna, after Budapest, after the letters and the memories and the faces of people who knew more about my soul than my own children, I wasn't ready to explain myself. Not yet. But I would be. That was the plan. When I opened the front door of my house, everything was exactly where I left it. The keys still in the dish, the coat still on the hook, the photo of Helen still watching me from above the mantel. Only I wasn't the same man walking into that room. I stood in the middle of the living room for a long time, my carry-on at my feet, and stared at the old photograph of Helen. She had this look half amusement, half warning, like she always knew what I was up to. I whispered. I finally went. And maybe it was my imagination, or maybe it was just exhaustion, but for a second I swear her eyes softened. The next day, my daughter, Maggie, came by. She had a key, all my kids did, but she still rang the doorbell out of habit. I opened the door and saw her expression change immediately. "You're back?" she said, eyebrows raised. "What happened? You weren't even home when we got back." I nodded and stepped aside. "I had a trip of my own." She followed me inside, arms crossed. "A trip? You said you didn't want to travel. That it was too far. Dad, you didn't even tell us you were going anywhere. We thought maybe that I'd fallen, or wandered off, or died." She bit her lip, said nothing. I sat down and gestured for her to do the same. "I wasn't trying to scare you, but when you told me I'd slow you down, it made me realize something." She looked ashamed. "Dad, we didn't mean it that way. We just thought." "I know," I said, holding up a hand. "You thought you were protecting me. But the truth is, you were protecting yourselves. From inconvenience. From discomfort. From the idea that I might still have some living left to do." Her eyes filled, and I softened. "I'm not angry," I said. "I just needed to prove it to myself. That I wasn't done yet." She leaned forward. "Where did you go?" So I told her. Not everything, not yet. But enough. About Jacob. About his son. About the letter. And then, very carefully, about Alona. When I finished, she sat very still. "You think she might have been?" "I don't know," I said honestly. "But I met her daughter. And something about her I don't know. She felt like family." Maggie looked down at her hands. "Why didn't you tell us?" I took a breath. "Because I didn't want permission. I didn't want someone to say no. I've lived long enough asking if I'm allowed to take up space. I didn't want to ask anymore." She nodded slowly. Then, quietly, "I'm sorry, Dad. We made you feel like your time had passed." I reached out, took her hand. "My time never passed, sweetheart. It just slowed down for a while. But it's not over. Not yet." In the weeks that followed, something shifted. I wasn't treated like porcelain anymore. I wasn't left out of plans or passed over in conversation. My grandkids started calling more. My son, Mark, came by one evening with a bottle of scotch and said, "So you ran away to Europe, huh? Total badass move, old man." I laughed. For the first time in years, I laughed like I meant it. We talked for hours. Not just about the trip, but about everything. The loneliness after Helen died, the long silences between visits, the way aging makes you feel like the world has slowly stopped answering when you speak. He looked guilty. "We didn't know, Dad. I guess we thought if you weren't complaining, you were okay." "I was okay," I said. "But being okay isn't the same as being alive." I started writing after that. Not a memoir, nothing so formal. Just notes, letters, scraps of stories. Things I wanted someone to know someday. I wrote to Jacob, to Alona, to Helen, even to Zhuzha. I didn't mail them, of course. They weren't for the mailbox. They were for me. Each one felt like lifting a stone from my chest. But the real weight came one morning, when I stood in front of the bathroom mirror and noticed something I'd been ignoring for weeks. A slight tremble in my right hand. Barely visible, but it was there. I told no one. Not yet. A month later, I returned to the neurologist. Routine checkup. I'd had some memory hiccups a while back, but nothing major. The doctor was kind. Too kind. She did the usual tests: memory, recall, dexterity, balance. When she finished, she didn't speak right away. I knew that silence. It was the same silence Helen's doctor had before telling us her cancer was back. I stared at the floor. "How bad?" She gave me numbers. Timelines. Names of medications that promised delay, not reversal. Then she said the word. "Parkinson's." It felt like a nail hammered through the stillness. I nodded. Slowly. Like I already knew. "I'm sorry," she said. I smiled faintly. "Don't be. I've lived through worse." I didn't tell the kids for another week. Not until I could find the words. When I finally did, they cried. All of them. I didn't. I was too busy thinking about what I still had left to do. I wasn't going to rot in this house. I wasn't going to spend the rest of my days shrinking into furniture and silence. No, I had a different plan. I emailed Zhuzha, told her the truth. Everything. Not just about the diagnosis, but about my regrets. The locket. The way I wished I had come sooner. She called me the next day. "You're not dying," she said. "You're living. And if this disease tries to take that from you, you don't let it. Not until the very last breath." I smiled. "You sound like your mother." "I am my mother's daughter." She offered to come visit. I said yes. When she arrived, Maggie and Mark were both at the house. It was awkward at first, introductions, explanations, the unspoken question hanging in the air like fog. Was she family? By blood? Maybe. But after the second glass of wine and the third round of laughter, no one seemed to care anymore. We were something. And sometimes, something is enough. We took a trip to the beach. All of us. Zhuzha had never seen the Atlantic. I sat in a chair in the sand, the ocean breathing beside me, and watched my children, all of them, walk along the water's edge. For the first time in a long, long time, I didn't feel old. I just felt full. Like something broken had finally closed. That evening at the beach, the sky turned the kind of orange that artists chase their whole lives. The waves came in slow, steady breaths. I sat wrapped in a blanket, my legs buried in warm sand, watching the kids build something that vaguely resembled a castle. Maggie brought me coffee, real coffee, not that decaf stuff they keep trying to sneak me, and sat next to me. "You ever think," she began, "that maybe we were just scared?" I raised an eyebrow. "Scared of what?" She hesitated. "Of watching you fade." I didn't say anything for a while. The truth of her words hovered between us like mist. "It's strange," I finally said. "You spend your life trying to protect your children. And one day, they start trying to protect you mostly from the things they're afraid to face themselves." She nodded. "Like losing you." I looked out at the water. "I'm not gone yet, Max. And I don't want my last chapter written by fear." She reached for my hand and gave it a squeeze. Neither of us looked at each other. We didn't need to. The next week, I started going through old boxes in the attic. Photos, letters, receipts from trips Helen and I took when gas was 19 cents a gallon. A pair of baby shoes I didn't even remember keeping. And then, tucked inside an envelope yellowed with time, my army dog tags. I held them for a long time. They still felt cold, even after all these years. I sat there, legs crossed, dust curling in the light from the single window, and thought about all the versions of myself that had worn those tags. The scared kid, the lonely husband, the quiet father, the man on a plane to Vienna with a secret in his suitcase. And now whoever this man was becoming. I wasn't sure yet, but he felt closer to the truth than any I'd met before. At my next appointment, the neurologist adjusted my medication. The tremor was spreading to my left hand now. My gait was changing too. Slower, less steady. "You have time," she said. "Good time. Years, even." I nodded. But I didn't want years of shrinking. I wanted months of meaning. So I made a list. Not a bucket list. I never liked that term. Buckets are for carrying things. My list was for unloading. It included simple things. Teach my grandson Caleb how to make my chili. Take Zhuzha to Helen's grave. Finish reading The Old Man and the Sea, the book I'd started 5 times and never finished. Dance once more in the kitchen. Record a message for each of my grandchildren to be played when they turn 30. And at the bottom of the list, tell them everything. One night, Mark and Maggie came over with their spouses. We sat around the old dining room table, the one Helen had picked out in 1974 and refused to replace even after the varnish faded. Zhuzha was there too, sitting quietly, sipping wine and watching my children like she was trying to memorize their names by their laughter. I stood, slowly, and raised my glass. "I want to say something." They all turned to me. "I know what's coming. Not exactly, but close enough. I know what this disease will do to me eventually. But before that happens, I want to make sure I leave nothing behind. No story untold. No moment unshared." They were quiet now. Still, I've lived a long life. Not always a loud one. But it mattered. And not because I built empires or won medals. It mattered because I remembered people. And I loved them. I looked at Zhuzha, at Maggie, at Mark. At some point, you will all be old. And the world will start treating you like you don't matter anymore. Like your best days are behind you. Like you're something to manage, not something to listen to. I felt the emotion rising in my throat, but I held it steady. When that time comes, I want you to remember this moment and fight back. Because there's no age limit on purpose, or love, or meaning. There were tears. I expected them. What I didn't expect was the applause. Soft, awkward at first, but real, like something sacred had just been acknowledged. A week later, Zhuzha and I visited Helen's grave. It was a sunny day, the kind Helen would have hated. Too bright, she used to say. She liked the overcast ones. Moody, like her poetry. I brought 2 flowers. One from me, one from Zhuzha. She would have liked you, I said. Zhuzha smiled. I think I would have liked her too. We sat in silence for a while. No need to say more. Before we left, I whispered, thank you to the headstone. Not just for the years, but for waiting until I was ready to let someone else in. By early spring, my body was changing. My hands were stiff in the mornings. My voice had softened, sometimes trembling when I wasn't even emotional. But my mind, it was still sharp. So I wrote. Pages and pages. Letters to people I'd wronged. People I'd lost. Even letters to myself, to the man I was at 20 and 30 and 50. One letter began. Dear Arthur, you thought silence was strength. You thought not needing anyone meant you were whole. You were wrong. But you learned. Eventually. Caleb, my youngest grandson, came over one Saturday with a notebook in his hand and a fire in his eyes. Grandpa, he said, I want to record your life. He was 13. I chuckled. You want to write my biography? He shrugged. Kind of. Just. Your stories. I want to keep them. So I can remember. That did it. I opened the trunk at the end of my bed, pulled out the old cassette recorder Helen and I used to take on road trips, and set it between us. He asked the questions. I answered. We talked for hours. About the war. About meeting Helen. About Alona and Jacob, and what it felt like to be 77 and reborn on an airport terminal floor. He was quiet for a while. Then he asked, Are you scared to die? I looked at him, this kid with eyes too big for his face and wisdom he didn't know he had. No, I said. I'm scared of not finishing. He nodded, wrote something down. Then he said, We'll finish it together. I don't know how much time I have left in the version of myself I recognize. Could be years. Could be less. But here's what I do know. When they told me, You'll slow us down, they thought I was nearing the end. They didn't know I was just about to begin. The summer after Zhuzha's visit was the kind of summer that slows time. Mornings were full of birdsong, and the evenings smelled like grass clippings and warm asphalt. I'd sit on the porch most days with a book I couldn't finish, letting the world pass by like a slow river. My hands weren't steady anymore. The tremors had moved from annoyance to fact, like gravity or taxes. I dropped things often, brushed my teeth slower, buttoned my shirts like I was learning for the first time. But strangely, I wasn't bitter. Not anymore. I had people now, not caretakers, not handlers, but family. Present, engaged, curious. They didn't speak to me like I was made of glass anymore. They listened. Especially Caleb. We kept recording. Every Sunday, he came over with his beat-up notebook and a different question. What's something you regret? I told him about a man I failed to save in France. What's something you still want to do? I told him I wanted to hear music outdoors one last time. Did you ever fall in love more than once? I told him yes. Then I told him how different it was each time, how Helen made me safe, and Alona made me feel infinite. One held me together, the other made me come undone. He wrote that down slowly. Do you miss them? Every day, I said. In August, my neurologist used a phrase I hadn't heard before. Cognitive drift. It sounded like something peaceful, almost poetic, the way a leaf drifts downstream, but I knew better. I'd been forgetting things. Not names or faces yet, but small things. What I came into the room for. Whether I'd already taken my pills. Once, I poured orange juice into my cereal and didn't notice until the second bite. When I told Maggie, she looked scared. Mark offered to move in. I refused both their panic and their pity. I'm not vanishing, I told them. I'm just blurring around the edges. But they stayed close after that. And that was enough. I gave each of them a letter. One for Maggie. One for Mark. One for Zhuzha. Inside each was a version of myself they never got to meet, younger, more foolish, more fragile. I told them about mistakes they never knew I made. I told them about choices I never forgave myself for. And then, I asked them to forgive me anyway. I didn't know you carried all that, Maggie said. I didn't want you to, I told her. That's what parents do. We carry what we can so you don't have to. One night, in early fall, Zhuzha and I sat on the back porch wrapped in blankets. I keep thinking about time, she said. I think about it too much, I replied. I mean how strange it is, she said. How you can lose 70 years with someone and still find them again. Not in their face, but in the space between words. I smiled. You sound like your mother. She turned toward me. I never called her that growing up. Just Alona. But after meeting you, it's like the missing pieces are falling into place. I look in the mirror and I see her. I see you too. I didn't know what to say, so I did what I've always done when words fail. I reached out, held her hand. By October, my legs had weakened. The stairs became Everest. So Mark built me a ramp out back. Maggie bought me a fancy voice-to-text tablet. Caleb programmed it, so when I said, Helen, it would automatically add a heart emoji. He thought it was funny. I thought it was perfect. Then came the day I knew would come. I was sitting at the kitchen table, toast untouched, coffee cooling, and for a full 5 minutes I didn't know where I was. Not just the room, the year, the life. Everything felt wrong, the shadows, the chairs, even my own name. It passed like a slow cloud. But afterward, I cried. For the first time in years, I let it out, sobbed like a man whose walls had finally cracked. Maggie found me there, still holding the cold coffee, hands trembling. Dad, I looked at her, and for a moment I didn't recognize her either. Then I did, and I said the only thing I could think to say. It's starting. She sat down beside me and held me like she did when she was 5 and scared of thunder. After that, the world got quieter. My days blurred. I napped more, talked less, sometimes forgot the beginning of my own sentences. But the house stayed full. Mark brought over jazz records. Maggie baked pie from Helen's old recipe and burned it just like her mom used to. Zhuzha sat beside me every Thursday and read poetry in Hungarian. Sometimes I understood. Other times I just listened to the sound of her voice and let it carry me like a tide. Caleb came over one last time with the recorder. Are you sure? He asked. I nodded. Ask me anything. He hesitated. Then, what's the most important thing you ever learned? I didn't answer right away. I looked at the boy who had become my mirror, my witness. Then I said, that the measure of a life isn't how long it lasted, it's what remained when you were no longer in the room. He wrote that down, very slowly. Then he asked, what do you want people to remember about you? I smiled. That I didn't stay still, even when the world told me to stop moving. That night, after everyone had gone home, I sat in my armchair in the dark, blanket over my legs, and listened to the wind. I didn't feel afraid. Not anymore. I just felt here, present, like a lighthouse blinking once more before the fog swallows it. A week later, I slipped into sleep and didn't wake up the same. Not dead, not yet, but somewhere between. I stopped speaking for a few days. Just smiled. Watched the ceiling like it was telling me something only I could understand. Zhuzha was there when the end came. She held my hand and whispered, you kept your promise. You came back. I squeezed once. That was all I had left. They buried me next to Helen. I had asked for a plain stone. No quotes. Just a name, 2 dates, and a word. Witness. Because that's what I had been. To war. To love. To silence and survival and stories that refused to die. To a world that kept turning even when I tried to freeze time. Caleb read a letter at my funeral. He stood in front of 100 people, voice shaking, and read the last words I ever gave him. If you're hearing this, I'm gone. But that doesn't mean I've disappeared. Look in the mirror. You'll find pieces of me in your kindness, in your questions, in your need to know the truth even when it hurts. Live loud. Don't wait. Travel early. Speak late. Dance, even when your knees ache. And when someone tells you you'll slow them down, smile. And go anyway.